Likkutei, Parsha Shelach, page 72. Second column, 8 lines from not the top of the page, but the top of this column. Okay, now the Rabbi started asking a bunch of questions about the Meraglim, and he starts explaining that a lot of mitzvahs are dependent on Eretz Yisrael, and we were discussing that while a person sustains himself from bread, even though bread down here is lower because it comes from a higher source, just like a seed in the ground that has to rot and then it comes into the highest of levels. And then he starts, now the Rebbe started explaining about Eliyahu Navi in Pasuk. Eliyahu says, Antu tapika sasa tikunin, you brought out 10 tikunim and you called them the Sfiris to run the world. And he says, what does it mean running the world? He says there's a level of Elokus which is too high, and then there's a level of Elokus that comes into the world. So even though there is a level of Atzilus, even though they're very great, but still it comes into a limited form, relatively speaking, and therefore it's able to run the world. And he says it comes to a point where Elokus comes down so much that you don't even see Elokus. All you see is the world. Therefore, that's the purpose of the neshama coming into the world. You need the tzerech aliyah to elevate the neshama. L'kaf yisid tracha to break evil, aydei sur merah, to by turning away from evil, v'aydei zistalik according to Kudsha Baruch b'chol almin, and that reveals the level of elokus in all worlds. Shliach kelim v'acholis, that all these chambers and the spheres should not be bechinas mastirim earnings of Baruch Hu. Instead of being vessels that block and conceal, they should be kelim the kabel gili earnings of Baruch Hu. They should become vessels to receive godliness by doing good, which is mitzvahs maisis. Ramach bikudim, the 248 mitzvahs, corresponding with the 248 limbs of Hashem. So he says, what's the purpose of all this? That normally the worlds, the chambers, Gashmis, blocks Elokus. So through the avoid of Sur Merah and Asay Tev, what a Jew accomplishes is that they take off the blockages, and instead of the vessels being blockages, they become vessels of receiving, they become receptacles instead of blockings. But before you can do Asay Tev, meaning making Gashmias a vessel for Elokus, first you need to have Semirah. In the level of Iskafia Sitrach, you have to break evil, because again, you can't put on clean clothing when you're full of mud. So first you have to get away from evil, Semirah. And then you can have, like it said, not to turn after your heart and eyes. That reveals the essence of Hashem. But then now that you got rid of all the evil, now you can make a vessel for Kedusha. You can do it through Asay Tev. Gili earns of Baruch Hu Lamata, to reveal godliness down here through the positive 248 mitzvahs. And mitzvahs are, like we said, why are there 248 positive mitzvahs? Because there's 248 different ways to bring down Elokus into the world. And each mitzvah has its own particular uniqueness that brings down that particular level of godliness. What? You don't bring down Elokus by not eating chazer, or not speaking Lashon Hara, whatever it may be. That's why there's no bracha in the negative commandment we learned. You don't say Shekhet Shem Mitzvah Sivanu not to eat chazer. What happens is like this. There's good and bad. Okay? Now, by not doing bad, you weaken evil. When you weaken evil, Kedusha automatically has more power. But you're not bringing down more Kedusha by not eating chazer. More Kedusha is brought down by an action. You put on tefillin, you do lulav, mitzvah, whatever. So that action brings down Kedusha. But in order for the world to be a vessel, you have to get rid of the evil. Now, when a person, God forbid, does transgress a negative commandment, they're strengthening evil. They're giving life to evil. And if they're giving life and vitality to evil, then it's more difficult for Kedusha. Yes and no. Therefore, mitzvahs are called the limbs of Hashem. Just like a mashal of limbs. Just like the limbs, what do the limbs do? They are the vessels to get the life of the neshama. You want to write something, so the hand is the vessel to write. The brain is the nerve center and feels the pain of all limbs. The same thing, mitzvahs. Brings down the level of elokus from chokhmah, steaming, the almond steaming to the hidden worlds, and then the almond is going to the revealed worlds. Okay, so that's the whole union of mitzvahs. You get rid of the evil. Now the evil is weakened, then you make a keli by doing a mitzvah. You bring down elokus from the concealed world, from above worlds into concealed worlds, into the revealed worlds.
Which one makes the keli? Fulminat or acetol?
No, the keli is asetev. It's just in order to make a keli. In order to plant a field, you got to get rid of the weeds. The weeds, getting rid of the weeds is not what's making things grow.
But it's the keli.
It's not the keli. It's the prerequisite to be able to have a keli. And now, so you asked before, why is Eretz Yisrael likened to the milk and honey? Why not oil? Why not something, So he says, because chalav v'dvash, milk is white, and honey is a reddish tint to it. That's chesed and gvura. Because red we know is gvura, and white is chesed. So he says, chalav v'dvashim treire in the chesed and gvura. Yamina may small, right and left, ubeinayel chala, middle of this level, ukamesha kosim mitachas reiselim, which is hamshach and salukosai de mitzvahs maisis, which are the mitzvahs brought down in machivam de malka, and Eretz Yisrael mechuvenes kenad Eretz Yisrael l'mayla. And we know, the Gemara says, there's Eretz Yisrael down here, there's Yerushalayim down here, and there's Eretz Yisrael in heaven. So he says like this, all the mitzvahs are to bring down elokus. Most of the mitzvahs, he said, are dependent on Eretz Yisrael, that he said before. The whole order of Zerayim and Kachim and Tadas basically refer to Eretz Yisrael. So therefore he says that Eretz Yisrael, which brings down these two levels of elokus, Chesed and Gvur, which are the general midas, that is why it's likened to milk and honey, because milk is Chesed and honey is Gvur. And that's the two arms that bring down elokus. Therefore, the primal, because what's the whole inyan of a mitzvah that Alter Rebbe is explaining? Revealing godliness down here. Connecting to him. That primary connection is in Eretz Yisrael. Through action mitzvahs. The uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael, there's a lot of mitzvahs you can only do in Israel. All the agricultural mitzvahs, Truma, Maisa, Shemitah, all that is in Eretz Yisrael. Then you have Kachim, the Karbanos only apply in Eretz Yisrael. These old things apply only in Eretz Yisrael. Because honey is reddish. It's reddish. It's sweet. So that's called the sweetening of Gevura. Hamtakas HaGevura. He says like this. Now we'll understand what the sin of the Meraglim is. He says like this. Iker mitzvah seberetz yisol dafka. V'meraglim hayu b'medrega gevur yised me'ed. The Meraglim was so great, le'rotz lahashpel esatzman la'mitzvahs maisis. The Meraglim was so great, this is mamish the way Chassidus turns everything around. The Meraglim was so great, they didn't want to lower themselves to do physical mitzvahs. They wanted everything spirituality, like the midbar, like it was in the desert.
And that's a sin?
What's that? And therefore, Eretz Yisrael, that's why the Meraglim said about Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Echeles Yishvehi. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants, meaning, Shahaya Bedaitam Shimyi Agili Earn Sof Lamata Kamei Lamaila, the Eve, of course, will be revealed down here. The way it is, Lamaila is Battle Mitzias Magami, they're not going to exist. In other words, they misunderstood. They thought the concept of mitzvahs is to bring godliness into the world to such an extent that Gashmias doesn't exist anymore. It's only Einer Milvade, it's only Elokus. And they said that's no good. The Davka wanted to say in the Midbar, which Amshachas earnings of Lebchinas Dibur to the level of Malchus. Eretz Yisrael Shalamayla, to the level of Eretz Yisrael Lamayla. In other words, like this. Midbar, desert, comes from the word medaber, talk, speech. The Meraglim were too great to bring it down into action. They didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael, is where action starts. In the Midbar, it was only the level of Dibur. Dibur is not as tangible as an action. So therefore, the Meraglim said, let's stay in the Midbar. Let's bring Alukus only down to a level of Dibur. But if we're going to bring Alukus into the level of action, like going into Eretz Yisrael, what's going to happen is it won't exist anymore.
But they knew Hashem wanted to.
That was they misunderstood it. That was their sin, by the way. Their sin was, in other words, theoretically, in theory, they were right. Stay in the midbar. Godliness, mon, this. But that's not what Hashem wanted.
But they knew that Hashem didn't.
No, they didn't know that.
They didn't know how Hashem said, I'm going to give you the Israel.
Yeah, but they thought that Yisrael would be a land of spirituality. They come into the land and they see what's going on. It's a whole different story. And he says that on their level was a big sin. On their level was a big sin because in theory you're right, you have good intent, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, you could be very good, but that's not what Hashem wanted. But now it makes sense. We were discussing last night by the class. The whole Inyan of Meraglim is not like the way you simple, they were good and all of a sudden they became totally bad guys. And like, how did that happen overnight? And all the expression that we were discussing last night, Vayishchatem Bamidbar, all these things doesn't make sense without this explanation. Huh? Yeah, but how does it come from super holy people in 40 days to go off the dead completely? To come along and say God can't conquer Eretz Yisrael.
They say that.
They said even God, Kaviyachol, Rashi says. No, the sin was, as we discussed last night, they came, but Moshe Rabbeinu told them to do something. They did it very well. They came back with a perfect report. Exactly what he told them. So what's wrong with what they did? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't ask for opinions. You know, Jews like to give opinions. So it says, Ephes, then after they gave the report, they said, but, that but cost us 40 years in the desert. Now that Moshe Rabbeinu would have gone in, Mashiach would have been there. But is opinions. I didn't ask you if we could. That wasn't my question. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm not sending them out to see if we could conquer Eretz Yisrael. Find out facts. Okay? Don't give opinions. That was the whole sin of the Meraglim.
In a way, God granted them their wish. They wanted to stay in the garden.
So next time, listen to the class last night. We discussed that. Oh.
Why would they want to stay in the it just doesn't make sense if God wants them to do it.
But they said, they're from their perspective, from their perspective, staying in the midbar was a better thing.
But why Moshe Rabbeinu even send them the Meraglim?
Okay, I should say over last night's class, go listen to the class online. What do you want to say over an hour's class? Vizel, okay, so they wanted to stay in Dib, which is Malchut Eretz Yisrael Shalamayla. V'nikra b'shem Eretz. And the reason why Malchus of Atzilus is called Eretz, because that's the lowest level of Elokus, like the Pasuk says, Ha'aretz Adim Ragli. The earth, Hashemayim Kisi, we said this in After Shabbos or Shchedesh. Hashemayim Kisi, the heaven is my chair, Ha'aretz, and the earth is my footstool. So Eretz is the lowest level of Elokus, which is Malchus of Atzilus. Hashem founded Eretz with Chochmah, meaning Abba Yosid Brata, the level of Dibur, meaning Abba, Father Chochmah created Malchus, the level of Dibur. Sheshor Shemei Chochmah, that comes from Chochmah, okay, because Dibur, like we learned, and it's the Torah not basically, Dibur makes somebody understand something better than thought. If you want to understand something, you just verbally it. You verbalize it. So, though thought is higher than speech, why shouldn't you understand better with thought than with speech? So the whole thing is, Dibur is lowest, this Malchus the lowest, therefore it's rooted in the highest, and therefore when you speak something, you're revealing the source, which is even higher than thought, and therefore you understand it better. That's the whole union of Malchus. And Kanir Mimasha Tinik. Shakals man Shenli Mechen the Yanika Bishlemis. Therefore, a child, a baby, even though he could make sounds, but because he's lacking maturity, he can't speak. Speech is demanded of a baby the second they're born, are screaming already. Even though the kid screams, it sounds, he cannot speak and combine letters because he doesn't have yet the level of chokhmah to divide up the voice. Because you can okay, but then you have to take this and divide it into letters. The same voice. So what did the Meraglim want? That all the level of Chochmah should only come into Dibur of above, which over there is Beis HaMikdash and all the levels. So the Meraglim said, let's stay in the midbar in the world of speech. Let's bring down Elokus into the world of speech. But Yeshua v'Kalev, and this is what now, again, this we didn't discuss last night, but Yeshua and Kalev said, Teiva ha'aretz ma'od ma'od. What did the Yeshua and Kalev say? Kalev said, Ole na'ala, double expression. We're going to go up. And they said not only is Teiva ha'aretz, they said not, how do they counter the Meraglim? The Meraglim said it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. Meaning we're going to lose out the Ruchnias by having to do all these gashmistic things. Comes along Yeshua and God will say, Ole Nala, it's going to be elevation. Teiva ha'aretz ma'od ma'od. What does that mean? Shaidei Eretz Shalamata Dafka. In the level of mitzvahs ma'isius, Yom Shabchinas Eretz Abchinas ma'od Beligvul. It's going to come to the level of double ma'od, Bchinas Almedus Demon, the Almedus Gallion, and that's ma'od 2 times, Almedus Demon and Almedus Gallion. So Yeshua and Kalev answered no. On the contrary, Dafka by the coming into Eretz, they reveal ma'od, the infinite level of the hidden worlds and the infinite level of the revealed worlds. In other words, to paraphrase this whole thing, the Meraglim wanted the Neshama to stay in Gan Eden, and the reality is Dafka in Neshama, in her body, do you elevate to a place greater than Gan Eden? They said, let's stay in Midbar, Medaber, let's stay Elokus in the spiritual realm, Mon, all that stuff. Let's keep it spiritual. And Yeshua and Kalev come along and say, on the contrary, you want to reach a higher level, it's dafke in the body. It's dafke in Eretz Yisrael, dafke in action. Not only once, ma'od. That's a much greater level.
How do they see this way?
They learned Likkutei. They learned the Smimer, the Meraglim. I mean, what do you think he taught? Taught the Tanya Likkutei, so they learned the Smimer, so they knew.
But how come the Chumash doesn't say it like this?
It does say it exactly.
What?
It says exactly like this.
But it says like, they learned this, all the, we saw it, and we're like, grasshoppers, and we're like, they talk physicality. They don't say, we just say we want to study, we want to be the people,
They said, Eretz Cheles Yishvei, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants, meaning you're going to be so involved in Gashmis, it's going to consume you, you're not going to be able to have Elokus.
Seems like they want to go to war.
All the Magidim, the speakers, the Musa speakers, when they speak, it says, Rashi answers the question. It says, Vayinu beinenu kechagovim, we felt like grasshoppers, we felt like, compared to those giants, we felt like garbage. V'cheinu yinu beineim, and so we were in their eyes. Yeah? So the question is, okay, what they felt, you can know. How did they know what they felt? The guys in Canaan. He said, well, so we were in their eyes. So Rashi says they overheard people talking because people here look like grasshoppers. So they heard it. But in the Moses Svardim it says, what you think of what yourself is the way people are going to perceive you. Okay? Because they felt like garbage, that's the way people are going to perceive you, like garbage. If a person has Jewish pride, then people will respect you. If you feel like garbage, then that's the way people are going to treat you. It's a very different concept, by the way. Huh? Musa is a chelik of Torah, understand? So Musa is not good. You know how many times the Alter Rebbe Tanya brings out Chachmi and Musa? Musa is a chelik of Torah. What are you talking about? There's Musa and there's Chassidus. One's Surmera, one's a Seitei. Davar Malach says Surmera. The Alter Rebbe over here says it has to first be Surmera before you can do a Seitei. Nobody says Musa is no good. There's an advantage of Chassidus over Musa. But Musa is a chelik of Torah. First you need Surmera, and then you can have a Seitei. So it says that the way you perceive yourself, that's the way others are going to perceive you. Any therapist will tell you the same thing. Okay, he says, why is that? Ki be'emes ika kavanasi is barich. She yir dira b'tachteinim dafka, because what does Hashem want? Dira b'tachteinim. That's what Hashem wants. And therefore only by being down here can you reach that level. K'mayim Razal, the Medrash says, Nisava Kodesh Baruch Li is dira b'tachteinim. What does Hashem want? Shiyah nigla le'en kol basa. That it should be revealed to every flesh. Shiyah gilu lemata kumei lemayla. That the gili, they were afraid if you reveal Elokus down here, the world's going to become bottled. He said on the contrary. But yes, it says the yisin min acheshach dafke. Okay, and he says why? Ki bem is kolshim adrega yesig gavaya ma'id. The greater the thing. Mizgala b'davar yesed tachten dafka, b'yasa says. Okay? And he gives a mashal of seichel. Let's see it inside. K'mashal mibar seichel gadol, you have a brilliant person, is not able to teach little kids. he's not able to limit his seichel to bring it down to a level of, lower intellectual levels. Sheyev shelegal chochmas mekabel seichel b'dibur ki im beremes. But ma'aseh dafka, you can only do it beremes. Okay, here's saying something else. Here the Alter Rebbe says, sometimes you can't bring out an intellectual seichel with speech, you can only do it with like a hint, showing something with your hand. Yochel legalut b'yesed says, "Can you maimazal daila chakima b'remiza?" It's okay. A chacham is enough with a remes. Why? Because the ultimate seichel comes when the Alter Rebbe was interrogated. They asked him a bunch of questions. The Alter Rebbe answered all the questions, and then they asked him, "Why does it say that Malchus is the lowest of all levels?" Which they understood it to mean their kingdom, the Russian Tsar, is the lowest of all levels. So the Alter Rebbe, instead of answering it, smiled. He answered all their other questions to utmost satisfaction of theirs. And then they asked this question, and the Alter Rebbe smiled. He didn't answer it. In other words, he said to them basically, "You don't want me to answer that question." And they accepted it. And there's a whole sikha from the Rebbe explaining the Alter Rebbe answered something higher than Dibur. It was too great of a level to... But he's saying over here that a greater thing sometimes has to come into action. You want to love somebody, you can say, "I love you," you can give him a kiss. The kiss brings out a much deeper level of the love than the "I love you."
The trash is higher.
Huh? Taking out the trash is even higher than a kiss, yeah.
Credit card is much higher.
The what?
If you give me a credit card,
He doesn't mean it.
Okay. So therefore the Alter Rebbe is saying, Adrabah, Yeshua and Kalev came along and said, not only will the earth not get in the way, but on the contrary, you're only going to be able to reveal the ultimate level of Elokus dafke in action, dafke in Gashmias, dafke in the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Okay.
wow.